Let's talk about building an act. Building an act is a really good idea because it creates a really good, over time, really good product that you can then shop around and take to different shows and impress audiences and make them laugh a ton. There's a common misconception about comedians that they do new stuff all the time, all new stuff all the time. And that's not the case. I understand why people have that misconception because comedians really try to sound extemporaneous and they'll say things like, I was just thinking about, or this happened to me today. But often that's not the case. It's theater and comedians get bonus points for sounding extemporaneous. And so comedians are incentivized to do that kind of a thing. But there are some real issues if you actually try to do all new stuff all the time. You will get some benefits, but there are a lot of problems that can result as well. I understand why people have that misconception because it behooves the comedian to make the audience feel like it's extemporaneous. The comedian gets bonus points if the audience feels like it's improvised to a certain extent. But if you actually try to do all new stuff every time you do a stand-up set, you'll run into some issues. And some of those issues are that you'll never build that really amazing stand-up act that you would have if you had honed your stuff. You'll end up with like a ton of B- material and not very much A+ material. You'll also run into an issue of you'll probably end up having less complex, less interesting and unique stuff because you have to think about a thing for a long time sometimes in order to get those really cool, interesting, different thoughts that nobody else would have. And so if you're just doing new stuff all the time, you have some thoughts about a thing and then you're done with that, you move on, you do something else. You've got so much more brilliance inside you. You just have to mine a bit more than that. So it's really worth mining into your stuff and honing it over time. You'll also get booked less because if people know you as somebody who does a lot of new stuff all the time, you'll have a not super trustworthy act because I'm sure that sometimes you'll write a bunch of new stuff and it's awesome, but sometimes you'll write a bunch of new stuff and it's not so good. And bookers want a more surefire act, somebody who they know they're getting a certain level of quality from. It's also a good idea to not do a ton of new stuff all the time for your own emotional and mental health. If you're doing new stuff all the time, there's a good chance that you're gonna be telling more jokes that don't work. I mean, they're untested. Obviously, there's a good chance that they're not gonna work. Why would you don't want to do that to yourself all the time, you know? You want to make people laugh and feel good. So testing your material out, doing it multiple times, making it better and better and better is going to make you feel better and let you know that you are a talented, smart, funny, thoughtful person, which you are. And it's harder to show that if you're just doing new stuff all the time. So for those reasons and some more, it's a good idea to look at your act as a product. There can be an issue sometimes, this comes up not infrequently, which is people will see you multiple times. And so you'll feel this extra pressure to do new stuff because they saw you do that old stuff before. But I encourage you to look at your goals as more of a long-term thing. You're not just trying to do well in front of that audience. You're not just trying to do well in front of these people who've seen you multiple times. And you're not just trying to make them, those few people, think that it's improvised. You're trying to build an amazing act over time. And if you spend a night not working towards that goal, then, that's one night that you haven't spent reaching that potential. And if you do that a bunch of times and you find other reasons to not work towards that potential awesome set, it's really going to slow down your process. So I would say that working towards your great act eventually is worth more than making a couple of people in the audience think that your stuff is improvised. And also, you gain more from doing a good set anyway, right? I mean, you make these like couple of people who've seen you before think that it's improvised, but in so doing, you're doing newer, untested stuff. And so there's a good chance you'll have a worse set. Those people, okay, maybe they think it's improvised, but they also don't think it's like as good as you are. And the rest of the audience doesn't have as good of a time either. And you end up feeling a little worse anyway. So you might as well just keep working on your good stuff and making it better and better and better. You know, and if these people who've seen you before, they should know that this is theater. And if they don't, that's their issue, not yours. And hey, it's an opportunity to teach them that this is theater. You may even want to, if you get a chance, let them know ahead of time. Like, hey, I'm not going to be doing very much new stuff tonight. I'm going to be working on my act. So you may see a lot of material that you've seen before. And that lets them know what to expect so that they're not disappointed. And also, you don't have to worry about disappointing them because you've already let them know ahead of time. So that can be a good way to handle it too. Let's talk about how much new stuff you should do at a show. This depends, right? There are comedians who are at various places in their process at any given show. And this is especially pronounced at an open mic. Because at an open mic, you are allowed to do as much new stuff as you want. You're allowed to do as much new stuff as you want anywhere, but it's more accepted at an open mic that some people are just starting out. They're just trying out a bunch of new stuff, right? So you can. There are some caveats, though. And like I said, you should be working towards your big, best eventual set. And so the only time you would be doing all new stuff is if you don't have any stuff or you don't have anything that you like at all. Then maybe you would do all new stuff at an open mic. But otherwise, it's probably a good idea to do at least one or two things that you know are good material. And that's because that gives you a nice measuring post. Every audience you can grade kind of on a curve, right? Some audiences they laugh a lot. Awesome. And then you can grade on that curve. You know, if my joke doesn't get a laugh, then, you know, that joke was not as successful because I know this audience is laughing at stuff. But sometimes an audience isn't laughing very much at all. And if you're doing all new stuff, instead of going, this audience doesn't laugh very much, you might think, my material isn't very good. But that would be an inaccurate assessment. And the only way that you can know that that's the case, well, one of the only ways that you can know, is if you use a measuring post joke. So you've got some jokes or at least one joke that you know usually works really well. You try it in front of this audience. If it doesn't get a laugh, then you know that this audience is maybe not the best audience to judge your material based on, right? And so you can adjust your expectations for that reason. Some comedians at open mics are putting the final touches on their act. And so you'll see like a wide variety of comedians at different stages in the process. And sometimes the comedian isn't going to be doing much material at all. Sometimes they're practicing doing crowd work with the audience. You'll see all sorts of comedians practicing all sorts of things at open mics and elsewhere, but especially at open mics. You'll also want to assess the audience to know if you should do more or less new stuff. And this kind of depends on how strong of a person you are emotionally. I can get a little bit sensitive, you know. So if the audience isn't laughing at stuff, I don't really want to try out new stuff for them, because if I try out new stuff and the audience isn't laughing, then I will start to think that new stuff isn't great, and I'll believe in it less, right? And I know that about me. And so I'm protective of the new stuff. I want to give it a good shot of doing well. And so I may do less new stuff for an audience that's not laughing very much. an audience is laughing a lot, then at an open mic, then yeah, try out a bunch of new stuff. If the audience is not paying attention, or if they are, chatty, or, wanting to enjoy the sports game that's on the bar nearby, then there's a good chance that you should maybe adjust your expectations. You're not going to be able to hone material very well that night. You may want to work on something else, be it crowd work or commenting on the situation, or maybe you say your material anyway, but it's not for the goal of honing it, or the goal of assessing whether it's good. It's just for the rehearsal. You're trying to practice performing it really well, regardless of what's going on. And that can be good too, right? But the goal should, if you don't have a real audience, the goal should change to be less of, is this material good? And instead be something else. Let's say you're at a booked show. How much new material should you do at a show like that? And in those cases, less. Definitely less than at an open mic. Because if you're booked on a show, the booker booked you because they like your material. They like the level of value that you give to the audience and how funny you are. And so you are expected to give at least that level of value. So do your stuff that you like a lot, that works really well, and maybe throw in a new joke or two, or a new line on an older joke or two, or something like that. But you're definitely not doing a lot of new material because you're trying to deliver that expected level of value. That's the reason that you got booked. If you get booked on, or you're trying to get booked, you're trying to look good for the big clubs in the area, or it's an important show for some reason, it's an audition for, a TV spot or something like that, then you're really not doing new stuff. You're doing your best stuff because you're trying to show them that you're awesome. And even if they've seen you before, even if the bookers have seen you do that stuff before, you are trying to show them your best stuff. That's number one. If you have some stuff that they haven't seen before that is also really, really good, then sure, that's a bonus. They'll like that you have new, awesome stuff, but the number one concern in those situations is that it should be your most awesome stuff. Let's talk about structuring your set. You might be thinking, what's a good order of things that I can do? What's the order of my jokes that would be best for me to create the right momentum and all the other benefits that I want to get out of this act? And so I am going to give you a recipe, but this is only one recipe. It's not the only one out there. This is an art, and so there's 1,000 different ways that you could put together your act and probably get a lot of interesting and different benefits. But this is one good one that does a lot of good for your act and the perceptions that you get. First, start strong. You're in the first impression zone when you get on stage. And so if you have something that's really, really funny, maybe one of your top 2 jokes, then it might be a good idea to put that early in your act. The next concern is how quickly do you get to that punchline? So if this is a really strong joke, but it is slower to get to the punchline, well, it's got a 1 point in either direction, whether it goes earlier or later in your act. You can look at these as like weights to weigh against each other. Strong joke and quick to the punchline. What gets to the punchline faster? If you've got something that's it's both a really strong joke and it gets to the punchline really quickly, that's a top contender for going early in your act. Okay, so quick to the punchline. Next is something that identifies you, that makes you seem unique or interesting, or that makes the audience root for you. right? Things that make you stand out for the audience and make the audience like you. That is definitely stuff that is useful to put early in your act. And the reason for this, just like the other two, we're in the first impression zone, right? And so you can get the audience to believe these things about you more quickly and in a stickier way. They'll continue to believe those things for longer if you do them early. But also, for this one, if the audience hears a bunch of jokes of yours, they might go, this is really funny. But if the audience hears that you are unique and interesting and somebody who they can root for and really like, and then you do those same jokes, they filter that information in to the rest of what they hear. And so they're like, this is really funny stuff from somebody who's unique and who I really like and who is fascinating. And that makes it so that those same jokes get received so much better by the audience. So stuff that is identifying for you, makes you unique, valuable in some way, interesting, and likable. That stuff makes it a contender for going earlier in your act. Next, stuff that is less tested, stuff that's new, stuff that you're not sure if it's actually good or not. That stuff you'll want to put more towards the center of your act. And that's because towards the beginning of the act, you're in the first impression area. You're trying to get the audience to believe these things about you. Funny, interesting, likable, etc. And then at the end of your act, that's the most memorable part of your act. That's the part where after the show, they go like, oh, I loved that closer. Or, they just remember that stuff best. So you want to send them off in a good trajectory, right? In the middle, though, that's a much safer place to try some things out. If it doesn't work, you still have time to win the audience back and make them think you're amazing and then send them off to the rest of the show and the rest of their night believing that you're the greatest comedian ever, okay? So newer stuff that you're not sure about, you can put that in the middle. Next is blue material. And blue material is just material that breaks some social etiquette in some way. So it might be sexual or violent or morbid or socially uncomfortable or something like that, right? This depends on the kind of show you're on, and it depends on where you're at in the lineup. So if you are at an open mic and you are late in the lineup, that is a situation where the audience has seen a lot of comedians, and so they're kind of tired, probably. At open mics, there might be like 25 people on the lineup, right? And if you're 20th on the lineup, people have seen a lot of material, and they've probably seen a lot of morbid, like blue material, right? And so in those situations, they're ready. They've seen it already, and so they're more accepting of blue material from you. And so you can open with blue material at an open mic. And it might even be useful to open with blue material if you're late in the lineup at an open mic, because you got to get their attention. It's been, they've seen so many comics that like you got to hit them with something that just like really grabs them. So it might be useful in those situations to start with blue material. On the other hand, if you are at one of the A clubs and you're opening, you're the host of the show, the audience is just fresh off the street. They just got out of line. They sat down. They were at work today. They have the same social standards for etiquette that they have had throughout the rest of their day. And they may intellectually know that they are at a comedy show, but they're not feeling that yet. And so if you come out of the gate with some blue material that's really shocking, then that might make the audience go like, whoa, oh, no, this is uncomfortable, right? They might pull back on you, and you don't want that. You want to ease them into it. So if you're hosting a show at an A club, especially you're at the beginning of the show, you may not want to do any blue material at all, right? Just keep it a little bit safer, less shocking for them. And then let the other comedians, once you've warmed up the audience, then the audience will be more accepting of that kind of material. And then the other comedians might be more able to do their blue material later on. Sometimes the headliner doesn't want the opener to do blue material at all because the headliner wants to do blue material, and part of the value that they'll get is that shock value. And if the opener does material on that topic, they spend that shock value so that the headliner doesn't get to get that value themselves. Or the headliner's clean and they have a clean audience. They want the show to be clean. They don't want the opener to do dirty or blue material, and then the audience sees the headliner doing mundane material, not mundane in terms of quality, but in terms of subject matter. And then the audience goes, oh, but we're expecting so much grittier stuff, and now we're getting something that's less than that. There are a lot of reasons if you're hosting a show at one of the A clubs why you might not want to do blue material. If you are on a book show that's not at like the great club in the area, then you maybe, if you are later in the lineup, you can do your blue material a little bit earlier. If you are early on the lineup at most shows, you probably either want to put your blue material later in your act or maybe omit it this time in favor of using it when it would be more appropriate on a show. Next, you are going to want to ramp up quality towards your closer, right? I say this because sometimes a person will think, I'll do new material and then I'll just win them back with my closing joke. But that's not quite enough time for the audience to get that momentum back if the new material didn't do so hot. So new material in the middle, not like middle, but also all the way towards the end except for your closer, right? So ramp up that quality. Do a few of your better jokes and then do your closer, and then you'll have sent the audience off with a nice trajectory. And then finally, close strong. So you'll be bookending with your top jokes probably, right? Unless you have some other concerns. Like I said, it's art. You'll have other considerations. But if you close strong, great. It's the most memorable thing. The audience will think back on your set and mostly on the stuff towards the end most of the time and go, this comedian was awesome. What a great closing joke. That comedian was great. So closing strong, also a very good idea.